let's insert this spoiler warning in the beginning of the episode in this. Spoiler warning. Well, I guess it's time to die. Welcome to the Flick Lab. Finally, to the finishing line of the James Bond marathon. We have quite a lot of people here tonight. 6. This is a record. So I'm Karri, your host. Then we have our guests. David Lowbridge-Ellis from License to Queer. Welcome.
Hello.
And Dr. Lisa Funnell.
Hi.
And of course, my regular stars, Mr. Zach Penn.
After that marathon, I need to recarb and get a leg massage.
And Tom, Mr. Tom Frankland.
Hello. I'll have a proleptic digestive enzyme shake, please.
All right. Certainly. Welcome to the party, my dear.
Thank you very much. I'm the Bond expert, so-called.
How's the cloud formation, Tom?
It's precipitous.
And Henrik, last but not least. Henrik, what an unpleasant surprise.
Well, we aim to please.
I think that covers all here.
And that's all we have time for.
Henrik, how's
And from
it going?
that side, we all know that Tom picked up on from where those lines were taken.
But not many people get it. That's the thing. And it quickly turns very awkward.
I'm sure Lisa and me were getting it. We were just being polite because we're the guests.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was it.
I'm going.
We won't be so polite in about 10 minutes. Give us time to warm up and get some strong opinions on the go.
Let's talk about our guests a little bit more here. So we have Lisa Funnell, and Lisa, you're the co-author of the Geographies, Genders and Geopolitics of James Bond, and the author of For His Eyes Only, The Women of James Bond, and other publications, but I guess the most pertinent material here is these two. And would you like to tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am an associate professor at the University of Oklahoma. I have been studying James Bond since the early to mid 2000s, right when Bond scholarship as a field of study was really getting off the ground floor. And I had the opportunity to learn from some of the really great thinkers of the early 2000s. My own work is really about examining aspects of gender, feminism, but more broadly identity, social justice. I've expanded it into geography, geopolitics, really trying to understand the messages being relayed through this global pop cultural franchise about gender, identity, geopolitics, and power. And so the first book that I put out, For His Eyes Only, The Women of James Bond, is an anthology, and it really came from watching Skyfall and seeing the legacy of James Bond being, in a sense, put forward and propelled forward at the sacrifice of so many women in that film. And I wanted to create a collection, and there's 28 essays, 28 scholars from around the world talking about various aspects about gender and feminism, really reflecting upon it. And then moving from there, I have done a lot of work with Klaus Dodds. He is a professor of geopolitics at Royal Holloway, University of London. He actually specializes in the Antarctic, but he does popular geopolitics in James Bond. And we wrote this book. It's definitely a passion project. It was written by email. We didn't talk, we didn't Zoom, we didn't meet until after the book was done. This is definitely a publication for the digital era. And it was just our passion going back and forth, talking about various facets of geopolitics and geography and connecting a gender and feminist lens throughout. And it really is a fascinating and unique read, looking at everything from the depiction, the gendering of geopolitical relations with, say, the United States and the Soviet Union and or Russia, to resource conflict in the world of Bond, to the different types of spaces that and how they're presented. So we talk a bit about the difference between East Asian and Southeast Asian spaces, whether it's horizontal or vertical buildings, different types of textures, materials, and so forth. And our last chapter focuses in on the representation of the heartland, where we talk a lot about The World Is Not Enough, Skyfall, and Spectre. And I will tell you that once Klaus has seen the film, we're going to be writing a paper, a review for the International Journal of James Bond Studies, probably looking at aspects of sort of nature and the elements, because I already messaged Klaus and said that's what we're writing the paper on. So there's a lot of stuff in No Time to Die when it comes to the elemental and its gendering and its connection to particular characters.
Wow, sounds pretty comprehensive. So what was the kind of the way, how did you find your way into James Bond's world?
You know, I think I stumbled. How did I find my way here? I've always followed my passions. And I've always let, in a sense, my heart be the direction of my career paths and my life path. And I was taking my master's degree in pop culture at Brock University in Canada. And I happened to take a cultural theory course with a professor named Jim Leach, who was one of the first people talking about and studying James Bond. And he was like, hey, Lisa, no one's really talking about the women of Bond. You should consider studying this. And I was like, okay, cool. And so I wrote my master's thesis on the Bond girl phenomenon, did a quantitative content analysis of, at that point, there were 20 films. And then, of course, moving forward from there, continuing my studies, my PhD, I wrote my thesis on Chinese action women, but that's because I loved Michelle Yeoh and Tomorrow Never Dies. I was inspired by James Bond to continue to doing research on Asian action women. But all along, I just kept publishing in James Bond and really just expanding my worldview. And I'm very fortunate to be employed at the University of Oklahoma in a women's and gender studies department. I had a great chair, Dr. Jill Irvine, who saw my potential. And I remember for my James Bond course, we had to pilot it as an online course to see if it was popular, right? To see if students would actually take this type of course. And it was so popular in the online version that they had to, the numbers basically showed that we had to have an in-class version. And I'm very proud of the fact that it's also a general education course. It's a gen ed requirement. So you get like double credit for taking my course. But it's a really thoughtful, comprehensive look at aspects of gender and identity and geopolitics and history. And I take students through the James Bond franchise. There's 15 weeks. We watch 15 or 16 films. There's a week that we double up. And I just take them through and we have conversations really exploring why this franchise is popular, what people got out of it, how things have changed, how times have changed. We have sometimes those difficult conversations about sexual violence in the early Connery era films. I'm somebody who's not afraid to have these types of conversations. And definitely encouraging my students to critique, right? And to be critical. But at the same time, and I'll throw this out there, I'm a different generation than my students. Like, I might look young, but I don't feel young. Like, the PhD aged me on the inside, not the outside. I sort of have like this time capsule on the outside. But I'm of a different generation. And as the years go by, I don't know how many generations are between us, but it's really important for me to listen to them. And I want to know what they see in film. I want to know what they think. I want to know what they feel. And I tell my students, look, at the end of the day, I'm invested as an expert in this field. I want to know what you see because it matters to me, because it's going to influence the way that I start thinking about and talking about this franchise. And so I think it's really important to understand that I'm not just doing this in a sense because it's just a passion of mine. I'm doing this in order to understand who my students are, where they come from, how they engage in film, and if James Bond is still relevant to their generation.
And it looks like tonight we have a fan of yours, and I can perfectly see why. David, would you like to tell us a little bit about that, maybe, and License to Queer?
Yeah, so taking an academic approach to Bond was something that I didn't even know you could do until I encountered academics like Lisa. So I am actually a little bit starstruck today, Lisa. I've got your books on my shelves at home, and whenever I'm embarking upon a new article that touches on Bond girls in particular, I definitely defer to your expertise first, and that kind of helps me form my own thoughts, because my own academic background is actually in English. I've got a BA in linguistics and literature, which are kind of useful for breaking down Bond. I've got a master's in leadership, educational leadership specifically, so that kind of sets me up to be a Bond villain one day if I ever want to be one. And but I've actually got no academic training in film, for instance, as a discipline, but I've taught it. So my day job is working in schools, although I don't actually do much teaching nowadays. I do more of the leading and managing side of things. But when I do get to teach lessons, I've taught English, film, and loads of other stuff over the years. So yeah, my website that I started 18 months ago, Licensed to Queer, was the result of decades, to be honest, of having all these thoughts about Bond. They've been going around in my head, driving me crazy. So I thought I might as well, put them down in a series of blogs. And I wrote 3 or 4 before I launched the website, and then things went a bit crazy, and now there's like 200,000 words on there, and there's not just my writing, but about a dozen other people, all but one of whom identifies as LGBTQ+. And the reason why I started that was because I was just sick of not having queer perspectives represented in the Bond conversation, perhaps similar to Lisa, really, in the sense that Bond is traditionally seen as a very male thing, and I know Lisa is really passionate about seeing it from female point of view, but I'm interested in seeing Bond from as many different point of views as possible. And that's, I'm a white gay man living in England, and I'm desperate to include as many perspectives as possible. So if anyone listening wants to write for the website and identifies anywhere on the LGBTQ spectrum, please get in touch. But I particularly like it when people get, I'm not afraid to use these sorts of words in this crowd, but auto-ethnographic. So whenever I write an article, I try to bring part of myself into it. I think it's almost like a form of therapy, really, because there was a point in my life where I did, like in my early 20s, go, why do I like James Bond? I'm a gay man and Bond isn't gay. And right. So I've and then obviously that's highly contestable now that I've looked into it in some detail. So yeah, it's sort of a form of therapy, really, because I think like many people on this podcast, I think my obsession with James Bond is borderline unhealthy at times, in the way that I seek to emulate aspects of his lifestyle and that kind of thing. So like my pieces.
Right, and I find kind of both of your work really fascinating from this kind of angle, because I find that there's so much there to look into when reading your blog, for example. First, I had this kind of a knee-jerk reaction, like this is going to be too much reaching and there can't be that much material to draw from, but there is, and it's really shocking to see it time and time again. I was just reading, the last time I was reading about the man with the golden gun analysis, and wow, just everywhere, really.
Yeah, I'm always quite surprised myself, if I'm honest. So when I approach a film, like Man with the Golden Gun, I've seen dozens of times. Funnily enough, I actually watched it this afternoon when it was on TV here in the UK, even though I've got it on Blu-ray, DVD, and whatever. I just thought I'd watch it while it was on TV while I was making the dinner today. And yeah, I mean, a film like that, you think, where's the LGBTQ plus appeal here? And then I watch it with what I call queer lenses on, and then I see so much stuff that I've never seen before. To the point that I wondered when I went into No Time to Die, which I know we'll talk about in a bit, but when I went into No Time to Die, I was thinking, am I going to stop myself from seeing this from a queer point of view, because it's the first time I've ever seen this film? I didn't stop myself, so that answers that question. It's kind of like I've opened Pandora's box now. Every time I look at any aspect of Bond, I see it with those queer lenses on, which I think I was doing subconsciously. My love of Bond goes back to when I was about 6 years old, so I've had more than 30 years practice at this. but it's definitely something that my brain is trained in those. I formed those mental models of queerness and the way I approach these films now. So I actually can't look at Bond without seeing it through queer lenses now, and I imagine Lisa's the same from her point of view as well.
Yeah, I love it. And I just want to keep encouraging you to, you can look through it whatever lens you want, but if that's now your natural default lens, I encourage it, because I think we need more, like you said, more lenses, more perspectives, more intersectional diversity in the films, outside of the films, but also in our commentary about the films. And for me, the greater diversity of perspectives, the better. The more I learn, because I only have one particular lens and set of experiences. So I love the work that you do, and I'm very supportive of it.
Oh, thank you, Lisa.
Just to be extremely reductive for just a moment, are those queer lenses, are they like hot pink? Are they purple? Or is there glitter?
Oh, they're every color of the rainbow, darling.
Oh, love that.
David, I also heard that you had a private screening for No Time to Die. Maybe tell us a little bit about that. How was it?
Yeah, it was great actually. I can't remember. We went to the cinema just after they'd reopened here in the UK. I can't even remember what we went to see. Some Marvel film or other, I think. And just before the film started, the kind of advertising came up. You can hire this screen for however much, and then that planted the seed. So long story short, I ended up hiring a private screen, which wasn't cheap, but not as expensive as you probably think it's going to be. But I have quite a few vulnerable family members, so I wanted to see Bond with my family. And initially I thought, okay, just blood relations, keep it to about 15, 20 people. But then they came back and said, well, our smallest screen is 47. So I think, okay, I still want to socially distance and all that kind of thing. So we invited our, what I call chosen family, the people we're really, really close to as well. So I've got to say, my experience of No Time to Die has probably been tainted in a good way by seeing it in those circumstances, surrounded by just people I love and I'm really close to. I've only seen No Time to Die once. I haven't been back to see it yet. I'm partly scared to go back to see it because I think, oh God, what if my second viewing is not as positive as my first one? But yeah, it was definitely an experience, and one I'd repeat for the next Bond film.
Yeah, there's been this kind of talk that after you go to see it for the second time, you kind of might have your whole perspective changed for the better regarding the film, because it's kind of a shocker, the whole film, when you first see it. So you might be kind of in loss of words when you see it for the first time. I went to see the film at Gibraltar on the 29th. That was a wonderful experience. I've been there before, but like a long time ago. It was great to be back, and it was a super small theater, but there was something to it. It was really intimate, and there wasn't even that many people around, maybe like 5, 6, 7 people.
When you say Gibraltar, do you mean Gibraltar attached to Spain?
Yeah.
That Gibraltar. Oh, yes. Wow. Okay. Amazing. So you flew to Gibraltar to watch No Time to Die?
Well, I just took the bus, actually, because I live really nearby now.
Oh, do you?
I'm Finnish, but I moved to Spain recently and live in Malaga.
I went to Gibraltar a few weeks ago for first time I'd ever been, largely because of the Living Daylights.
Of course. I realized that there's a lot of people here tonight, but let's try to take like a short tour of how was everyone's kind of experience of going to the theater. Mr. Tom, Frankland, Tom.
Hello.
How was your experience going there?
Well, I actually saw the film 3 hours ago, so I'm really fresh. It's really raw. I'm still kind of processing the whole thing.
Shaken and stirred, I'm sorry.
I think I need much more time to process
Roger Moore.
the whole experience. It was strange. That's the word I've got for it so far. It's strange. It's different.
Henrik, how was your experience?
Well, I've seen it yesterday, so I'm also relatively fresh. And not to go too much into spoilers about how I felt. I don't know. The theater experience was actually pretty average.
I've actually seen it now 3 times, and on the 3rd time I was supposed to go there with notes, and I did, and I had pen and paper, and I couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
I was in the back row, and somehow after like the first week they had removed all the so-called voice showings of this movie, so you couldn't hear it in English anymore. So I really didn't want to hear it in Spanish dub. But what you gonna do? What about Zach?
Yeah, I saw this film on Friday night. My husband and I are very lucky that we live across the street from an AMC Dolby theater. So we saw it there, and it was a packed house. So that always makes things a little more fun. Everyone in masks, thank God. We were pleasantly surprised by the crowd. It was very respectful, but there was one person in particular who was so engaged in the film they could not help themselves but to directly interact with the screen at times, not giving anything away. There's a moment where a child is told, "Don't touch anything," and then about 4.5 seconds later, she's reaching out to touch a plant. My God, she just said, "Don't touch anything. What are you doing?" Like it, full voice. It was hilarious. So yeah, it was a good experience.
Anything you want to say about the entire franchise, before we go to No Time to Die finally?
I think I might be the least experienced person here when it comes to Bond. You can count on one.
That's me.
You're the Bond expert.
Yeah, sure.
You can count on one hand the number of Bond films that I've seen, and I saw Spectre the day before I saw this one for the first time.
I'm sorry.
So I've not seen many. Thank you. I appreciate your sympathies. So I'm putting it out there. I'm coming into this as sort of a virgin.
All right, so maybe I won't keep you for more than an hour, sorry if you give me your undivided attention, but it's all started with Dr. No in 1962 with this unknown, sexy Sean Connery. And From Russia with Love continued from there, 1963.
Are you about to go through every single film?
I don't know.
This is Karri we are talking
He is,
about.
trust me, he is.
Yep. We're gonna be here even tomorrow.
Okay, Goldfinger. And what do we have after that? I think
Then
was
it's Thunderball.
Thunderball?
Yeah. Wow.
Where's your line?
Just kill me.
Karri, sorry, I forgot the line. Sorry.
Okay, the line is, what's happening? What's going on?
Serves you right, Karri.
What's happening? What's going on?
I don't know. Could it be the front doorbell? Okay.
I hope the 2 new guests are still here.
We're still here, yeah.
Are we talking about No Time to Die?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm counting off the decades on my fingers here.
Karri.
See, this is a bit like my party piece. I don't really have any special talents, but I can recite the James Bond films and years even after 3 martinis. So
yeah. And the directors and the DPs or whatever. But Henrik,
and the composers and
okay. GoldenEye, Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Died.
Oh my God, you just can't help yourself, can you?
Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, Spectre. And now we're finally here. No Time to Die.
I thought I liked listing things.
We're going to have no time left at this rate.
We're under a tornado watch in Oklahoma. Like, a tornado might hit my house by the time we get to the end of this film.
Yeah,
like, I'm going to have to leave to go to my shelter.
I was going to say, you are aware that I once recorded with the Really 007 podcast boys, and the edited version was 10.5 hours long when we talked about Diamonds Are Forever. So the original cut was about 16 hours. So thank God they cut it down. So I can talk for England. So we're just gonna. I think we're gonna have to be a little bit more restrained than doing scene by scene.
Yeah, let's try that. So here's the topic for you: treatment of women and gender equality. What did you think about this whole thing? Because
I
it
think
was a huge.
Lisa's got to start here. Yeah.
It was kind of a huge talking point before the film came out, and when I came to the theater and saw the film, I felt that there was nothing really that special about it. Like all this hullabaloo about the thing, and then of course the treatment is. I think it's great, but it's not like in your face, which is what I actually really liked about the film. That it feels really natural and not kind of forced in any way.
It's quite subtle, but it's noticeable as well.
It's really subtle and quite non-existent.
Well, let's take Lashana Lynch's character. Lashana Lynch is kind of in the helm of many vehicles, like the motorcycle or motorbike, and also taking control of the flying apparatus when they go to the island. And so James Bond is kind of taking the back seat here, and it makes perfect sense in the motorcycle scene because it's her motorcycle she's offering the ride, and it's not like get the hell off from the driver's seat, Bond, I'm gonna take over or anything like that.
Do people really have that much? Is masculinity that fragile that people have anxiety about being driven by a woman?
No.
Because, I mean, Sean Connery was driven by a woman all the time.
I know. Yeah.
I'm just waiting for there to be a story in the next couple of days. I read the making of book today. A shop in the city where I live had put it on sale early, so I couldn't resist. So I'm expecting a story at some point in the next few days when the clickbait crowd get hold of this book and start, teasing it apart for as many different articles as they possibly can. Because one of the things that Karri Fukunaga says was in the original draft of the script was that actually in the car chase scene, or at least in part of the pre-titles, Madeline was driving the Aston Martin DB5. So I thought that was quite interesting that the film might have started with her driving an Aston Martin, and I presume, we haven't said anything about this, but I presume we are going there with spoilers. But the film ends with her driving an Aston Martin. So I would have been intrigued to see how that aspect of the circular narrative might have played out. But really, just because a woman's in the driving seat, do people feel threatened?
Well, I didn't even pay attention to it until Karri mentioned it.
Right? It seemed to be a huge deal for some people on Twitter.
Some people need to grow up.
Yeah.
But also, it's not as if she does anything in the driver's seat. Like, for me, I think that Nomi is an interesting character. I think they were very conservative with what they gave her to do, right? She's supposed to be the other 007, and yes, she drives, but she's not driving in a chase sequence. She's not doing evasive maneuvers. She's not trying to outrun anybody. She's in the driver's seat, but she's not necessarily doing much. And Bond has always been challenged and impressed by women who have been in the driver's seat. Yeah. And I also think it's interesting with Madeline Swan in the pre-credit sequence. I get that she's not driving, but she's sort of in Tracy DiVincenzo from On Her Majesty's Secret Service seat. Only this time the car has bulletproof windows. And so the attempt at her life and the constant shots being put at the window to try to kill her and make her be the deceased bride, who in this case is pregnant, and wearing white, so she's at least wearing the bridal attire. I found that it worked better to make that type of illusion if she was the one who was not driving. But it is interesting that the film does end with her driving away into the sunset, telling a story, knowing the importance of cars in general, but this car specifically to the world of Bond.
What about this whole tampon gate, let's call it that? Because there was like a huge... It can only be described as tampon gate because before the movie, Lashana Lynch, I understand she threw this kind of suggestion to the screenwriters, I think mainly Phoebe Waller-Bridge, that maybe we should have like a scene where some kind of transition material, whatever it was supposed to be, to have like the change of tampon in one scene. But
what?
I've never...
This is completely passed me by.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And nothing like this happened in the movie as far as I could see. There was one toilet scene with the two ladies, but I don't know what was the kind of suggestion, what was going to happen there.
But what would be the harm of realizing that people menstruate? I mean, at the end of the day, it does take up 1 week out of every month. And there is such a taboo in talking about menstruation, and lots of people menstruate. And so normalizing the fact that this is a function and an experience, and it is a conversation thing, oftentimes in bathrooms. Do you happen to have a sanitary pad? Like, these are actual conversations that do have, and these are conversations sometimes that certain people feel more comfortable having than others. And so, I mean, I get what she's saying. Like, can we just like normalize, different things? But I don't think, I mean, I don't, just like burning a bra was just like a flippant comment that happened outside of an event, and then it became like this big thing, like feminists burn bras. Nobody burned a bra. I have a feeling it could have just been like a joke that happened somewhere, and then people just kind of run with it. But there's nothing, just throwing it out there, there's nothing wrong if you menstruate, and there's nothing wrong with utilizing sanitary products and having conversations about it. I think we need to mainstream and normalize that more.
Absolutely.
So that's
And
at
if
least
there
my
was
opinion.
If there was a natural way to bring it into the story, if it was just Madeline and Naomi in the bathroom or whatever, then it fit the scene, then great. But yeah, so this is complete news to me. So were there some people getting angry about it?
Yeah, very angry. And well, I wasn't angry, but I'll be completely honest. I was kind of worried about these comments, because it felt like this there's very little way for this to come off as naturally on screen. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I don't want the film to be making some kind of a statement, like visibly statement, and then distracting you from the movie. Just some ordinary everyday things. Yes, if you can kind of show it in a way that it would kind of fit in a movie. And
it's not like they're going to be issuing Q-issue tampons that explode or anything like that. It's just going to be
Which would actually be really cool.
Yeah,
though,
that actually would be really cool. But I'm sure there would have. It's a writer's issue, isn't it? I'm sure they could have naturalistically brought it in if they wanted to. But that's quality writing. But yeah, it's the same with any of these things. Lisa used the word normalize. I like the term as well, usualize. So it's just particularly in queer theory, we tend to use the term usualize just to make things very matter of fact. And I don't know if anyone else has got any views about the LGBT representation in this movie, which, like with most Bond movies, is incredibly minimalistic unless you look at the coding. Now, I know that Q is preparing what looks like a romantic meal for a man. Disappointingly, in the making of book, they do refer to it as Q's friend. But there's definite possibilities there, and I personally, I'd like to think it isn't just queer baiting, but it's that kind of usualizing the fact that Q is about to have a romantic meal with a man, and they use the he pronoun. That's I think. I actually think in its small way that is quite game changing. Just doing in that almost nonchalant way, which I think a lot of media really needs to aspire to. I think sometimes because things are so inequitable, we do need to make a big statement, but at the same time we need to be just treating things as they are in real life. Men have dates with men, shock horror. So yeah, I don't know what anyone else thinks about that.
yeah, I agree that this whole introduction of kind of Q's sexuality was brought in such a way that it was really natural, and there was nothing kind of off about it, and I think it's great that we have more of this presentation in the films.
I just think it's ridiculous that we're living in this 2021, or I know this film was supposed to be released 2019, and they're not referring to, like I'm sure we all do in our workplaces or our friendship circles, to people who are in relationships with people of the same sex. It just seems that there's I know the world about Bond is an outlandish fantasy, but if we it's a real outlandish fantasy if queer people don't exist in it.
Yeah, but Q's friend, really?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was a denial. It was a quote from Michael G. Wilson, and I think he was kind of maybe hedging a little bit, but yeah, but I don't see it as a denial necessarily. It still opens up all those possibilities.
Right.
Sometimes when you are first seeing somebody and somebody asks what you're doing, you might refer to them as your friend. I'm just saying, like, that happens in a broad sense in general, but I do love this the idea of, instead of normalizing, usualizing, but I usually refer to it also, like in my work, as like the power of unremarkability. When something just is allowed to exist on screen, right? It matters that we have representation on screen. But when we're not like pointing and like putting signs and trying to define and explain, just allowing things to be is such a very powerful thing. Now, it's a very small moment, and I would love to see more of those types of moments in films in general, and positive moments, right? In film in a broader sense. But I love the power of unremarkability and how it was utilized, whether you're going to have a Black woman being 007 or you're going to have Q and his relation. I'm going to extrapolate Q and his boyfriend. I'm just going there. In this film, I thought it was great. And again, doesn't need explanation. It's just there. We all accept it, and we just continue to move forward. And I think that that's really powerful, at least in my opinion, through my reading of it.
I love that phrase, Lisa. I'm going to start using that one. Credit to yourself, of course. But power of unremarkability. Yeah, that is definitely, I think, what we need to aspire to. As a gay man, women have, throughout cinema history, been sometimes points of identification for gay viewers who may not kind of map themselves onto the alpha male masculinity and that kind of thing. So, you know, a lot of Bond girls are quite queer icons, particularly gay icons. And I found the presentation of Madeline in this film so much more impressive than, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, so much more impressive than Spectre. I get really annoyed with the scene in Spectre where they both escape Blofeld's hideout, and she, even though it's been established that she knows how to use weaponry very well, she doesn't pick up a flipping gun and start shooting the men. And I've got one of my female friends hates that part of that film as well. She's like, Madeline, grab a gun. And I know that, Lisa, in your work, you've explored in detail that regressive representation of gender from Skyfall onwards. Is that kind of too much of a simplification of your argument, or is that, because it's definitely something that for me, I kind of I know we're going to get onto our rankings of Craig films in a bit, but I struggle with Skyfall onwards a little bit because of the women with less agency.
Yeah, I would say Skyfall, there's a regression in representation. I referred to like Spectre, and I would probably put No Time to Die in many ways as being like a reversionist, meaning it's reverting back to like older times. So
yeah, I agree.
I read Madeline Swan as being a composite of all these qualities of women that came beforehand, and which I think that's the reason why I struggled to connect with her in Spectre, because she's just like this puzzle that's put together, and we're told we're supposed to think she's a match for Bond rather than seeing her fall in love with Bond, seeing him fall in love. Like, I don't feel anything between them because I've been told this is it, and that's just the way to go. And I feel if I'm really going to be like thinking about her narrative arc, I see in her, this is a very specific lens. As somebody who studies action women of the 80s and the 90s, usually there's some sort of explanation as to why women are heroic. You don't get that with Paloma, and you don't get that with Nomi. But when it comes to Madeline Swan, there's such an overarching narrative of she's a daughter following in her father's footsteps, so that explains why she knows how to use a gun, and she's a mother who's going to protect her child, which is why she uses the gun. But there's this theory called the disconnect, and I teach this to my students, where I'm like, women of like the 80s and the early 90s are not allowed to be maternal and violent in the same moment. And if you look at someone like Sarah Connor in Terminator 2, she's a really good example where you can be capable and competent in action and shoot the gun, but that's a different moment than when you're holding your child, where you are ineffectual in action. And so there's this idea that the desire to take a life versus make a life or create life are very different things. And so when I looked at her character, there's a lot that I like about her, but I felt it was just like Daniel Craig's Bond is this older version of like 1980s masculinity, which I can really push through with the natural man and a whole bunch of imagery and No Time to Die really rounding it out. I feel as though she is connecting to the same type of heroic model that he's also tapping into. Oh gosh, I wonder if I could write a paper looking at the Terminator and No Time to Die and models of like heroism, because when you look at Terminator 2, Arnold Schwarzenegger is presented as being like the best father for John Connor, and he learns how to become more emotional from being a killer. They take out the chip in his head, and then you have Sarah Connor struggling with her emotions because she wants to protect her child, but in the moments that she's protecting her child, she can't be like emotionally connect. Anyways, I'm going on a tangent, but I think there's a paper there.
As you were talking, I was thinking of the scene where Bond, which is one of my favourite scenes in the whole film, the scene in the Norway forest, shot in Scotland, but the scene in the Norway forest where he's holding the child, Mathilde, and I couldn't help I'm sure you've seen it, but John Woo's Hard Boiled, the hospital scene where Chow Yun-fat is carrying the baby through the hospital while shooting a gun at the same time. And I thought that was, we've kind of seen that occasionally, but that's the only other time I can think of, outside of comedy anyway, where you've got a action hero who is firing a gun while also clutching a young person. So I'm sure there are others, but
I think there's so many reasons, coming back to Madeleine, why Madeleine doesn't work in Spectre. Well, there's a lot of things to discuss why Spectre doesn't work, and actually a lot of it is still a bit of a mystery to me. There's so much to crack in that film. It's a really exciting film to analyze in many ways. But so in Spectre, Madeleine is also, I feel, written in a way that she's kind of distant and, I don't know, heartless, but she wants to keep a bit of a distance, and there's some kind of an aura of there's something mystical about this woman. We don't know too much about her, and they kind of like to keep it that way. And also the problem of introducing the character in around the halfway mark of the film doesn't give too much to work on to build the kind of emotional side of things in Spectre. But there's more, I think.
Much more,
Roger Moore. But Daniel Craig might be playing James Bond also in a way that I don't think he means to look a bit bored sometimes on screen, but that's kind of the idea that you can draw from that. But it could also be that he's trying something different. It could also be that he was fucking pissed off because his leg was broken to pieces.
Sensible answer, Karri.
Thank you. But and I think there's been a lot of development even since Spectre times, after all this Me Too movements and Donald Trump and everything that has been happening between Spectre and now. In Spectre, I found it a little bit not so proper when Daniel Craig is pushing Monica Bellucci in front of the mirror, and these kind of moments are completely absent in No Time to Die. What do you think, guys?
I think the Monica Bellucci scene is the best scene in the whole of Spectre, personally, but that might just be me. Okay,
didn't you feel that it was kind of inappropriate to to do that, even though Monica Bellucci's character goes along with it? Well, you could do that analogy to
and
she's
she's in a vulnerable position, but also the scene is, for better or worse, impossibly cool. The way that Bond dispatches the villains with the silencer, and for me it was one of the redeeming parts of Spectre, but other opinions exist.
I think it's impossible to sort of talk about the change of tone without talking about sort of the cultural changes that have happened. Like you mentioned, I think things like the Time's Up movement, Donald Trump's presidency, have affected cinema, have affected culture and media, and I don't think that we can go back. I mean, God knows, knock on wood, that we don't, but I think it would be difficult to go back to a series in which the protagonist is a man who conquers women. I think is the best way I can say it. He seduces and conquers them, and they're very much objectified in his view. And I don't think that behavior will stand anymore. So this sort of post Time's Up Bond, I think, is the Bond of the future, and that's for the good, both for good and for the good.
Yeah,
I think it does raise a very interesting issue, though, about, I mean, this film was made late-ish 2010, so as the Me Too movement was coming to the fore, and it's been a question I've asked, is sexuality and conquest still a core component of the James Bond brand? It was for, I would say, the first 20 films. I think the model of masculinity, heroic masculinity, has changed across the Daniel Craig era. I think that when you see the scenes of sort of the women who play those typical roles, who tend to be secondary characters. So I'm thinking of, Monica Bellucci in Spectre. I'm thinking of Strawberry Fields in Quantum of Solace, Solange Dimitrios, even Severine. These tend to be secondary women who are exploited. Their bodies are, in a sense, occupied by Bond, and many of them are killed off in their films and shown to be disposable. And oftentimes, the strong women who appear in those films, we talk about them, but we don't talk about this lingering aspect from, the previous generation of filmmaking, right? And it is that question of, is this something that is this a long-term quality? And when you look at a film like No Time to Die, Bond is only with Madeline Swan. I don't know what he does off screen, but he doesn't seem like he's been sleeping with a bunch of people. When Nomi talks about where's the bedroom, Bond's like, oh, like he has a shocked look on his face. And when Paloma goes to measure him up for a suit or tuxedo or whatever he was wearing, he was like, are we getting it on? Like, is this your room? And she's like, what are you talking about? Right? You can tell that he's confused because times are changing. He's changing. Even the model is changing. And I think this Bond is very self-reflexive. And so, this is the first Bond film where you don't have that archetype. And I will tell you, it's really refreshing that Bond is not necessarily sleeping with every single person that he meets. It also makes his relationship with Madeline Swan seem that much more meaningful. So when he looks at her and says, I've loved you for the last 10 years, I believe it. Because part of me thinks he's been celibate for the last 10 years because of the love that he had. But it does raise the question as to whether sex, conquest, if these are, which are core parts of spy culture, and James Bond has played a huge role in really pushing this idea of sexpionage forward, right? And there's various iterations in the past, and I know you mentioned From Russia with Love, but I mean that's a really good example of sex being part of the job. We're not even sure if either partner really wants to have sex with the other person, at least at first, and it's being filmed and there's no consent there. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there. But this tends to be normalized in our spy culture. And I think what the Me Too and Time's Up movements have done have really raised that question in a general sense of is consent necessary? Which it is. And how do we then move forward in our media culture, let alone our workplaces, in ways that demonstrate safe spaces? And is our media culpable in really encouraging this notion of rape culture by presenting images where consent doesn't exist? We're presenting that a no doesn't actually mean no. It can be changed to a yes with enough force or coercion. So I think that there's a lot of questioning going on here about the Bond brand. And in the next iteration of Bond, however they choose to reimagine the Bond franchise, it will be interesting to see where they fall, because they have just shown that they can do a movie with compelling women. And think about Paloma. Everybody seems to be loving Paloma, and yet he doesn't sleep with Paloma. There can be really strong, capable, charismatic and appealing women in a Bond film that don't necessarily have to sleep with him.
There's a great reversal in the Paloma scene. As you were describing it, Lisa, I thought of the equivalent scene in The Man with the Golden Gun, which I watched earlier today, again, where he's essentially about to get naked in front of her. And it's a reversal of, there's a scene in Thunderball as well, where Fiona Volpe's in the bath and she asks for something to put on and he gives her her shoes. And then it's the same thing in Man with the Golden Gun, where Andrea Anders is in the shower and he doesn't really give her anything, and he expects her to basically stand naked in front of him. And I really love that part of Paloma's introduction, because it's the gender reversal of that we've all been waiting for over the years. And of course she's polite enough to turn around, which Bond isn't necessarily polite enough to do so when it was the other way around.
Can you guys consider the previous M, who was
Judi Dench?
Yeah, I wouldn't say she was a secondary character. She was quite a strong character
No,
in
she
those films.
absolutely, and this is an interesting point we have discussed previously with Henrik. This point, was it in Spectre episode or whatever? But in GoldenEye, she comes off as like a very powerful female character who is
Yeah.
constantly, showing Pierce Brosnan's James Bond that this is the new times and you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, blah blah blah. And then in Tomorrow Never Dies, there's still little bit of that kind of the leader attitude type of thing, but then we get to The World Is Not Enough, where she needs to be saved, and she seems to be really worried and scared, like most of her performance. Then we get to Die Another Day, and it's kind of the same thing. Like she's not the leader in the scenes anymore. Like even Michael Madsen kind of overpowers her.
Yeah, and Judi Dench as M, when it comes to the female presentation in the entire Bond franchise, I think that's as hard, and but basically that is reaching the top when it comes to female presentation, and basically everything else I do find bit lackluster.
But No Time to Die, still we have some of the
doesn't
most
do enough.
Well, it has some of it has some of the most fleshed out female characters in the entire franchise, I would say. There's still something that they could work more with, but
it has like two fleshed out female characters. Madeline's one who has the advantage of one previous film already behind her as a character, and then the female 007, and that's it. We have Paloma, and what do we know about her? There, not really that much. There is some fleshing out, yeah, but I really wouldn't count, for example, Paloma as the most fleshed out female character in the franchise.
At least she gets to shine a lot of her character in those 5-7 minutes that she's on screen. And everybody seems to be that everybody is like going crazy on Twitter about Paloma as a character, and
I can't understand why. Like honestly, it completely escapes me, and I was fearing that this is something where we will come into blows, me and perhaps the rest of the cast of today's episode.
Well, but I didn't think about it too much when I was watching it and when she went away. But I really liked that kind of a comedic aspect that was given to her character, and it doesn't happen too often that I could tell that you have a female character and she would actually be also written to be a funny character, and this works so well, and it's kind of yeah.
She reminded me most of, and this is a bit of a left field, but she reminded me of Katharine Hepburn in screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s, where she had a sort of innocence about her, but did an amazing job all the same and managed to, everything kind of turned out all right in the end. But I don't know if anyone else sort of got that. It's that sort of wide-eyed innocence, but also she really does know what she's doing sort of appeal part of the character.
Yeah, there's this kind of a turning of expectations, and you hear that she has had only 3 weeks of training, and then she surprises everybody in the audience basically by kicking ass.
I mean, the director has said that there's actually no reason for her to exist in the film, so she was quite a late addition, and it was him who brought her on. That Bond doesn't actually really need a fixer in that scene, but whatever, we'll go with it, and I think the film is a lot richer for it.
Yeah, it is much richer for it, and I would say that those minutes that she is on screen, she has more character and kind of interesting quality than Lashana Lynch in the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. I think she's the bright spot of the film, if you want my opinion on it. And I feel as though when she talks about being inexperienced, this could be her feeling out Bond. She has no idea who Bond is, right? And what he's about. This could be an aspect of her personality, or it could be this trope that's utilized by a lot of action women. You see it in Charlie's Angels, you see it in Hong Kong action films. Marianne Doan refers to it as a masquerade of femininity, where you where you wear your womanliness as a mask, and you appear overtly feminine and you hide your possession of traditionally masculine traits, and violence is a traditionally masculine trait. And so when she does start shooting and kicking and doing everything on screen, it does come as a surprise, but for me, it was a welcome surprise. You know, Nomi might be the 007, but she doesn't really have any physical action in scenes. Like, she's always shooting a gun or laying on her side. She's not engaging in combat and action choreography. And that's something that I love. I mean, I love Atomic Blonde. I like anything where women are kicking and punching and fighting. And to see her do it in that dress, in those heels, and when her gun doesn't work, she's hitting people with the gun and she's killing them, and she's so incredibly delightful. And what she does is she also brings out of Daniel Craig a lighter side of James Bond, which you don't see in any other James Bond film, where it looks like he's the James Bond I've always wanted him to be, and they're drinking and there's a joke and there's a quip, and they're able to go on, in a sense, a standalone mission in the middle of the film that's not weighted down by any of the drama at the beginning or the end of the film. And so for me, it was just like, oh my gosh, this is a breath of fresh air and what I've wanted in the Daniel Craig era for the last 5 films. And so just based on my personal preferences of who Bond is and what I like to see when it comes to women on screen in action films, that entire sequence was like, that was the film for me. I was like, okay, this is why I'm here.
I think Zach, if we want to talk about more about the female characters, Zach just might be the one who has the most recent viewing experience of Spectre. I don't know, but you did watch it recently, and what do you think, Zach? Why Léa Seydoux' character Madeleine works so much better in No Time to Die, or does it?
That's a great question. First, I just want to second Lisa. Yeah, I think that Ana de Armas she's the bright shining spot in the middle of this film, and as soon as she left, I was like, can we go back? Can we go back? Just 5 more minutes. Just real quick. She is delightful. Léa, I don't know. It is frustrating. I can't remember. Was it Tom or was it David who mentioned, like, why does she use a fucking gun? We know that she can, and in times when she needs to, why doesn't she? So that is, I agree, that is frustrating. To fit this mold of this damsel in distress, I suppose, some trope that has to be checked off a to-do list or something. It's better in this film, for sure. She definitely takes a little more ownership and has a little more autonomy, but I don't think we quite got there in terms of action, but in terms of heart, I think we do. I think, Lisa, you also mentioned, she's the only person that Bond has sex with. I would even go so far as to say makes love with. She has become this emotional center to the film. I think this, again, I haven't seen many of these films, but this one felt very emotional for me. There were multiple moments where I thought, oh, this doesn't feel like a traditional Bond film, at least the ones that I've seen, because there was so much emotion. So
did No Time to Die save Spectre as a movie? Any thoughts?
No.
It made it worse.
Yeah, I agree.
Didn't think it was possible, but it did.
I think there's more emotion, more all kinds of expressions, and frankly, more to do for her in the film, in No Time to Die.
She's a great actor. I mean, if you're gonna, it's the same. It's like the Judi Dench principle. If you put Judi Dench in a Bond film, you better give her something to do. And I feel that with Léa Seydoux, they didn't give her. Look, Spectre is a lacking film in my opinion, not because of casting, but because of script writing. Right? You have Christoph Waltz, who is just this deflated Blofeld. Why? Because there was nothing for him to do. There was no meat and potatoes and anything for him to grasp onto. This wasn't a Quentin Tarantino script. You might love Tarantino, you might hate him, but Tarantino at least gives his actors a script to work with, right? And I don't think Lea Seydoux and I don't think Daniel Craig, I don't think the film was set up for them to do what it was trying to accomplish material-wise. But in this film, because it's mirroring Honor, Majesty, and grow, and we learn and grow and fall in love as well, here there's a lot of breathing room for Madeline, allowed space for her to learn and grow, and we learn and grow and fall in love as well. Here there's a lot of breathing room for Madeline Seydoux to fill up those spaces. And look, I was not a fan of Madeline Swan Inspector, so I'm not a lover of the character, but I felt for her, especially after the second watch. Like, Lea Seydoux kills every scene that she's in with the emotion. She is this emotional barometer going through and pushing us through, and especially the ending. The ending is powerful. Yes, it's Daniel Craig looking into the screen and doing his thing, but it's also powerful because of her and her emotional reactions. And if you want to talk about who's the heartbeat of the film, I feel as though she is really being this heartbeat moving forward, because she's been very steadfast. She's very true to this idea that she loves Bond and she loves her child, and that carries her through from the start to the end.
And there you go. It's kind of like Daniel Craig replying to George Lazenby in that one The Guardian article, where Daniel Craig said that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is one of the best films because it has like this, I don't know, paraphrasing, emotional core because of the love story.
I think the pre-titles was a masterstroke. Again, it was something that was completely the brainchild of the director to film that entire sequence in Norway, which I did think that, it's got a long story short, there was a bit of a kerfuffle at the start of our screening, which means that we actually had to move screen. So I thought, even though the MGM logo had come up, that they might even have put the wrong film on, because there's this kooky guy, like, not kooky, but there's this disconcerting kind of horror movie aspect of the beginning of No Time to Die. The only reason I knew it was No Time to Die is because I knew that the French song Dans la vie endormie was playing at the start. I thought, okay, we are in the right film then, but it didn't feel like a Bond film for the first 5 minutes, and that's a great thing, because you know, I'm definitely in that camp of you should always keep trying new things. But I think that pre-titles will, when I rewatch Spectre, I think when they relate that scene of her, you know, going to the cupboard with the bleach and getting a gun and starting shooting, I think it will make me think of that scene, and I think it will make that scene in Spectre more impactful.
You just can't please everyone. It's a shame. I see a lot of people just not liking the pre-titles because it doesn't feel like a Bond movie in the beginning. And I just found it great that they can have you know, different tones to the series.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was this the longest pre-title of the Bond franchise?
I'm not sure.
It's about 24 minutes.
Must be. Yeah. The World Is Not Enough is something like 15 minutes.
15, yeah.
And Daniel Craig's performance, I think it's the most... He feels kind of energetic and more relaxed in this film than in any other film. I think there's more depth to his performance.
I think the writing helps a great deal. One of my favourite scenes is the beginning, at least, of the encounter with Blofeld, and how he is quite almost nonchalant. He's sort of channeling Sean Connery in Diamonds Are Forever almost when he confronts Blofeld, which is one of my favourite scenes in Diamonds Are Forever about halfway through. That scene was one of those edited by Phoebe Waller-Bridge. And I definitely think that you can sense her influence in that. I just think the dialogue is so fantastic there, and Craig is having a ball at that point.
Yeah, I don't know if Christoph Waltz got too much different tasks or things to do in No Time to Die compared to Spectre. I think it's pretty much the same thing as in Spectre, and it just doesn't work for me. What's this Tarantino movie where he plays the Nazi?
Inglorious, but I can't say it because I'm a teacher, so I'm not going to swear on the podcast, but you know which one I mean. Yeah,
that Inglorious thing. I think he just is playing the same character that is in that, but in Spectre it's completely non-physical. He's just playing these games with these odd drilling devices and always keeping like an arm's length to James Bond, and I think that's kind of the problem with the baddie of No Time to Die as well. There's not too much physicality. Well, a little scuffle by the end. But Henrik, what did you think about the bad guy in No Time to Die? Well, let's talk about the hench guy.
Well, I found him
Cyclops.
not to be anything special.
And I found
And the same goes for mostly the bad guys. No Time to Die is the case where you have overloaded script and you have like two bad guy plot lines going on. And it tries to play these plot lines against each other and have like this crossroads situation, but pretty much nothing comes from it. The Spectre thing. In fact, if something, it just manages to downplay the entire Spectre. I have this huge grudge against Spectre and I wanna take revenge on Spectre. And there was really a lot of material there. And then the whole plotline just deteriorates. It becomes your typical Bond film villain plotline. I wanna take over the world and destroy humanity for, well, basically just your average Christian symbolism, which is something that the film is more interested fleshing out and toying with than with its female characters, which was supposed to be the major selling point of the post-Me Too James Bond. So, from my end, bad guys, the main henchman kind of forgettable, Spectre underused, really disappointing, and the main bad guy works well at first and then turns to absolute garbage.
But I feel as though somewhere along the way, a lot of the descriptor stuff got lost. And I feel as though the villainous characters got lost in the process. And it was more like spectacle and, oh no, there's this dangerous technology, but like, that's where they left me. And the middle part of the film I found very like a little bit dull. That's where you just needed to just figure it out. Just tell me what's going on, how it's going on, why this is really important. And I would have loved to have seen this auctioning off, like this idea that the boats are coming in. So don't just say it, visualize it, have a screen and show all the different people from these different countries and nations coming in, and you know, the docking area where you're getting ready to set it up. And then I would have been like, okay, this is an imminent threat because here come the boats. But it's a little line that the boats are coming in. And that's not enough to make it so pressing that you need to blow up the layer and Bond in the end. Like there was a disconnect between what was going on. And I think just to like really push this point, so many times in the script, the writers are like hitting us over the head like a whack-a-mole. Do you know what the whack-a-mole game is? Where there's a little mole that comes up and you hit it with it's a carnival game, and you hit it with a paddle, right? And we call it whack-a-mole. And I feel like they're like, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, or the 007, the 2 007s, that's the whack-a-mole. Like just over and over and over. And when you do focus so much on like berating me with that stuff, you're occupying precious time in the film that could have been utilized to really flesh out narratively what is going on, so that when you do have the end of this film, I want to feel the pressing danger. I want to know that there's an imminent threat, and all of that is just sort of sideline, or we're just expected to just buy into it and believe it. I didn't feel the intensity. I didn't feel the urgency, which is what I really want to happen in a Bond film. At the end of the day, he died for personal reasons, but like, I need to know that there's also like an imminent threat, because that's technically your job. And at this point, he's reinstated. So this is technically your job.
Yeah,
I agree with you on everything else except with in the facial disfiguration, which I felt that this film, from all the Bond films, this is the one that uses its bad guys' facial disfiguration the most. Granted, it uses it only to play off Christian imagery and Christian symbolism, but at least it does that. Like, this is once again something that where you give it a credit for doing the bare minimum, but at least the facial disfiguration this time played into something, unlike basically any other James Bond film.
But where does the disfiguration even come from? We don't even get an explanation for why it looks like that.
It's the poisoning for when he was a child. But you're right. It kind of... It really, the neater part of the story would have been that he has some form of scarring from his encounter with young Madeline. That would have made so much more sense to the story.
But before we go even deeper in, I think there's so many things to touch on what you guys were talking about. So first of all, the movie is like 2 hours and 40 minutes, 48 minutes, almost 3
Why?
hours long. And I think that the film is throwing so many things at you that you never get bored, that's for sure. You know, there's so much to process, especially as a Bond fan, after this film. I could imagine this film feeling kind of lackluster because it, for a person who is not a Bond fan, because there's so much of the history and so much of tying all the loose ends, and this is where I think the film has also a problem with the fans, because there's so much going on, and just this kind of you have to solve all these plot lines that were kind of left loose after Spectre, or not really even. And the films wants to throw those all at you, but it's not kind of communicating a very coherent narrative structure for the characters. For example, if we go back to something like Casino Royale, which is almost like a masterpiece in the way that it tells, you know, the character development, and the whole story works, and it's pretty simple. You know, just a couple of assholes play poker at the casino, and they make that interesting. And here,
At the point though that in a Bond movie, and I completely I agree with everything Lisa said. I and everyone else has said really about that we don't get the intensity from the villain's plot. And but if you look at any Bond movie, I mean, if you take The Living Daylights, which I think is I always think is the ultimate extreme of, you know, it takes you about 5 viewings to work out what on earth is going on, and they're passing diamonds here, and they've got marijuana here, no, heroin, sorry, here, and then they're hanging out the backs of planes, and when you were, who's defecting what now? You know, it's that kind of, having watched that film so many times since a child, I can of course explain it properly, but as a kid I was kind of like, okay, it moved, and I know, you know, they've said this since Dr. No, Bond movies move so quickly that you don't really have time to kind of stop and think about the story. I think you have time in this one to stop and think about the story, and I think that might be, I say this might be a problem. I love this movie. I mean, I know we didn't get our opinions out right at the start here, but I do absolutely love this movie. As I say, I've only seen it once so far. So when you love something, you overlook its imperfections. So I'm being really nitpicky here, but for me, the cohesion comes from a thematic cohesion. And I know that I find the Sam Mendes two films a little bit pretentious in this regard. They've really got explicitly articulated themes with a capital T in them. You know, these are almost literary works. They've got these upfront things.
Self-indulgent.
But for me, I thought, they are self-indulgent, but I found thematically, I found No Time cohesive. And you know, whether it's the best characterization of Bond is debatable, but I found that well, in my mind, I've got kind of clear what the big theme is, and everything kind of pegs onto that, really.
Yeah, I felt that this is not such of a masterful film in the way that it tells its narrative compared to something like Casino Royale, maybe even Goldfinger, in a way that this is more of a fan service than like a movie that everybody can go to see. But I really like the movie as well.
And you say it's interesting because I've got some friends who, in fact, one of our best friends, she hadn't seen a Bond film till 3 weeks ago, at all. She'd never seen a Bond film at all, and so she somehow got into her 30s without watching a Bond film. And we watched Casino Royale together, and her wife, she had only seen a couple of Bond films as well. Both of them were absolutely all over Casino Royale. Just thought like it was brilliant. And then our plan was to watch all of the other Daniel Craig films. We didn't have time to do that, and partly they didn't come to the screening which I saw it at because they'd actually booked a holiday. But they then just went to see No Time to Die. And bear in mind that one of them had only ever seen Casino Royale as a Bond film. They saw No Time to Die, and she absolutely loved it. Bawled her eyes out at the end, as I'm sure many of us did. So, I don't know, I'm not sure it's as simplistic as this film works better for the fans. I know lots of, David Mitchell wrote an article in The Guardian today, which I completely disagree with, that, James Bond can't die. And I'm just like, that's probably the part that's dividing people more than any others. But it's not as clean as dividing it down the line of the hardcore fans think Bond shouldn't die and the ingenues shouldn't, don't think Bond should die. I don't think it's as clear cut as that.
Just a couple of mentions from the past discussions. Henrik, I think that there is no need to create exactly memorable henchmen or baddies, in my opinion, as long as they are interesting in other ways than facial disfiguration or something. I felt that the Cyclops is not on the par, right? The primo guy, obviously you can't compare him to something like Jaws or Oddjob as like classic characters, but I think that's the kind of the problem of the Bond franchise nowadays, because they try to do that thing again, even with Hinks. I don't really care for Hinks, and I feel that it's just trying to do the same thing again that was already done millions of years ago. I think what they should be doing is just to create more realistic characters, and as I told to, I think, Lisa on Twitter when she was posting about something, that I think we should look for characters that are more realistic, like maybe Francisco Scaramanga, who is more human. I think those baddies are the most interesting of the franchise and in movies in general.
My favourite villain of the Craig era is actually Dominic Green.
Yeah.
And he's the only unscarred villain. And there was an explicit intention to the scarring. I know I haven't said anything about this so far, but the scarring I find very unsettling. I wrote about this quite a lot when I was tackling Dr. No. I thought I might as well do it because the presentation of disability in Dr. No, it's extremely dodgy. The thing that I think in terms of scarring that they've really missed a trick with, which hopefully when they do a hard reboot of this, I think it would go a little way to redress some of it, is that Bond himself is scarred in the books, and it's always irked me that since I read the Fleming books as a teenager, that we've never had a scarred Bond, and I think that would help. I don't know what anyone else thinks.
On his face.
Yeah, on his face.
Yeah, because like the Craig era, he has scars on his body, but not on his face.
Not on his face, no.
And as you have read some of those novels or the novels, I understand that James Bond actually dies in the novels. I haven't read all of them.
No, he dies at the end of From Russia with Love, but he was brought back sort of like Sherlock Holmes was brought back by Conan Doyle. And then he dies at the end of You Only Live Twice, but he basically loses his memory and writes his obituary, which is quoted in No Time to Die. But he lives as a Japanese fisherman for quite some time. So yes, he sort of dies, but doesn't really die twice.
Ish. He dies ish.
Let's insert this spoiler warning in the beginning of the episode, but in this spoiler warning, I want to talk about this. So James Bond dies. Your thoughts, Lisa?
Okay, let's be honest. I hated it. When I first saw it, I hated the ending. I was upset. I felt betrayed by the franchise. I couldn't believe that they did this to me. And this comes after, a long, however many months of COVID. Haven't seen my family in like 20 months. Utilizing the Bond franchise as a source of nostalgia and comfort, connecting with the Bond fan community, being disappointed by all of the spaces and gaps and delays all along. And so here I am in a Bond film. It's finally here. I'm super excited and pumped to go. And this is how it ends. I was just not in a place emotionally prepared to handle it. Had I seen it when it was supposed to come out pre-COVID, how would I have felt about it? I don't know. I may have had a very different reaction. When I watched it the second time, I thought it was a very emotional ending, but I still don't like it. I understand, look, I'm going to do research on this. I'm going to find out what was going on at the time. I understand other heroes were dying around the time. You've got Logan dying and Iron Man dying and Black Widow dying. Like, it seems to be all of our big heroes and superheroes are dying for the sake of the world or for personal stakes. So it's definitely a thing that was happening in cinema at the time. I don't think I was as emotional watching Logan when it happened. I still cried at the end of Logan. That's fine. But again, there's a daughter in there, so I think that there's a lot of parallels between Logan and No Time to Die. So yeah, I mean, I have people messaging me all the time asking because they want to talk about the ending because they're not okay with the ending. And how do you feel about James Bond dying? And I feel as though from the things that I've read, this was Daniel Craig's stipulation for coming back, and they worked backwards for it. I think there's a conversation to be had about the separation of an actor and the character that they play. I know Rami Malek had an interview where he said the line between Daniel Craig and James Bond, it's razor thin. I couldn't tell. And I'm sitting there being like, you should be able to tell because it's a character. And so I don't know how I feel about all of it. Maybe by my 30th watch, I'll have a different opinion. And just throwing it out there, I hated Casino Royale when I first watched it too. Like I was like, what is this garbage? He's not Pierce Brosnan. This is not what I signed up for. And now it's my favorite Bond film. So my emotional reaction to Bond films, I like the fact when I have a reaction because I ask, what am I reacting to? And I just utilize that as a stepping stone to analyze the film in a lot more detail. But that was me. And I don't think I'm alone in this reaction. I think there are a lot of people who are like, oh crap, this is not what I wanted. I just encourage them to go for a second viewing because it does hit differently. Everything smooths out more in the second watch.
Yeah, Mr. Frankland, what do you think about this? Because there's so many things thrown around by the time when James Bond decides that he's not going to make it anymore. Yeah, first of all, he gets 3 or 4 bullet hits to his body, and then he gets infected with these nanobots, and then he realizes that he has no time to get out of the island anymore, but apparently he has plenty of time to die. So what was it? Like, why did he... Like, did he give up because he can't hug anymore his daughter or his loved one? Did he remain on the island because he can't do that? He decides that he cannot find any way around it. Maybe there could be some future technology that would allow him to get rid of the nanobots or somehow neutralize them.
Well,
I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous because it's a technology. You could kind of reprogram them and that's it. But I think it is about the thing that he has no time to get off the island. That seems pretty clear.
Well, he had a busted leg. Aside from anything else, a busted leg, so he couldn't get off the island. But
did he have a busted leg as well?
I think so. He was limping.
Yeah, well, bullet shots can do that.
I guess. I've never had it. I'm sure.
Yeah, fortunately.
It shouldn't have killed Bond off. I was just as shocked as Lisa. Why did they do that?
I have a theory why.
Please.
I do not want this to open up a whole new can of worms because I know we have to wrap up, soon. But I think that fandom has become a bit toxic over the last few years, and I think rabid fans have a hard time separating actors from their characters. And Lisa, you just said it. Logan, Iron Man, Black Widow, all of them sort of did their run, they did their thing, and then dying in the film is their way for the actor to leave the role because, well, the character's dead, I can't come back. And it's a nice, clean way to say, sorry, fans, you won't get me anymore, because there's this ownership that some fans feel like they have over these characters. And I think this is the way we have to deal with this now, because you can no longer just say, all right, and Sean Connery did his bit, and now we're going to move on to Roger Moore, and then we're going to move on to Pierce Brosnan. No, you got to kill him now, because if not, then it's going to be, oh my God, can you believe he refuses to come back? I guess he doesn't care about us fans. We're the ones that put him there. I think we're going to get into that toxic fandom, but I think that's my working theory.
I agree with all of that. Perhaps am I the only one who actually thought it was a really good idea to kill him? I'm just checking before I carry on.
I'm personally.
I think you're the only.
See, I went in there and I thought there's a 50-50 chance of Bond dying in this film. I don't know if anyone else felt the same, but I had avoided spoilers right up until about 5 minutes before the film when my auntie turned up and told me that she'd just heard on the radio that James Bond died. So that was great.
Oh, God.
So I knew right at the start of the film that he would die. But to be honest, I kind of almost relaxed in a sense because I thought, okay, I thought that was a possibility. Now I know it's going to happen. I can kind of just relax and kind of wallow in the tragedy because that's me and I like depressing, sad things. So but I thought going into the film, this is, before I definitely knew he died, I thought I thought it would be entirely fitting for the character's arc. And I thought it was probably the only time in cinematic history where they'll ever actually be able to kill James Bond. So considering, all the emotional weight of the preceding films and where things are leading. So I thought it was a bold choice, undoubtedly, but for me, it felt entirely fitting. And if they had found a way to do the ending from You Only Live Twice, the novel, where he's thought dead but not really, which is the other, I thought there was a decent chance of that happening. I think I'd have felt a bit cheated, to be honest.
I was really shaken by the film in so many ways. I didn't know what I was feeling. I was just shocked. I was probably just mouth open, watching at the screen. What the hell is going on here? I just stared at the screen and I just stared at the credits roll. And okay, we have all the time in the world is playing. What on earth has been happening? That was my feeling. And then I fortunately saw the James Bond will return. I was scared. Like, are we gonna get the James Bond will return text at the end or not? And we did get that at least. So I didn't cry after James Bond died or anything that happened in the end. Did you guys cry? Cry
3 times.
I was going to say that having said what I've said, I did shed a tear at the end.
Okay.
It was very sad.
Yeah, but it was a little bit rushed or maybe not earned in some way.
Yeah, I was crying throughout most of the film. So that's me.
Okay.
I like crying at films. That's one of the best reasons to watch a film, I think, to have a damn good cry, because it makes me feel really good. And when you're in a cinema in particular and it's dark and you don't care if anyone's seeing you, not that I care if people see me cry anyway. I've cried in front of my students over the years, we've been reading something sad or whatever. So I have no compunctions over crying. I don't have any hang-ups about it being unmasculine or whatever. But I cried when Bond was at Vesper's grave and acknowledged that he missed her, because I thought, I desperately hope what he's just said to Madeline is a lie and he hasn't moved on, because I never see Quantum of Solace as him affecting closure at all, and moving on.
I gotta ask you guys about that exploding grave. Did you guys jump in the air when that happened? I did.
Yeah, it was pretty shocking.
I think I lost 10 years off my life.
I hit my husband and he had to shift in his seat to sit further away from me, because he knows I'm a jumpy person, and I almost backhanded him. I was so scared.
Still going back to Safin, and this is my last before we go to the quickies because we're pressed on time. Safin, his plot, we have discussed this a bit, but did anybody actually catch what the hell is Safin's world domination plan all about? Is it about just being kind of doing what Bond would do, just getting rid of the bad guys, and it would be his kind of free range way of getting rid of all the bad guys in the world?
No, he just wants to be Satan.
Oh,
technically, that's the whole thing.
Yeah, thank you, Henrik, because the movie doesn't tell me anything about this at all, and it kind of makes me think: is there a hell of a lot of deleted scenes from this movie? Because that's how it feels like.
I almost think they were a bit afraid to go any more definitive than they went. One of the most powerful moments in the film for me, and it's Nomi's best moment, is when she kills the guy who essentially could engineer genocide, and she pushes the professor. I've forgotten his name, but she pushes the professor into the acid bath, and gets to say the title of the film essentially, because he's basically threatened her entire race with extinction. And as a queer person, I understand there's not much of a genetic basis for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, and so forth, if any at all. But at the same time, whenever I see any group in society being attacked, I feel really emotional about that. And obviously, race is different from sexuality, but I found that moment, because they've got that entire wall of so many different people's genetic code, and they can program it however they want. I think it's if you let the implications play out in your mind, I think it becomes absolutely terrifying. I'm not saying that during the course of the film, going back to what Lisa was saying, I'm not sure that during the course of the film that all played out in my mind completely. But on further reflection, I think that's what they were sort of going for, that you could wipe out black people. You could wipe out people with, ginger hair. You could wipe out people who have certain genetic traits. And that is terrifying.
Yeah, of course it is. It's really understandable, because attempts at doing this are like they have existed historically. Like the prof's line here is kind of a node towards Project Ghost, an individually felt threat.
Guys,
Yep.
on a different topic, did Valdo remind you of Boris from GoldenEye? That's the connection I got.
In what way?
Both mad scientists.
Scientists don't tend to fare very well full stop in Bond, do they? In fact, anyone with a brain doesn't tend to fare very well in Bond. Anyone who's particularly nerdy or geeky, and I use those terms with the deepest of affection. But,
Yeah.
as a self-professed nerd about Bond and lots of other things. But, yeah, anyone who's, even in Fleming, anyone who's intellectual, there's a great discussion about it in From Russia with Love. Someone says that all intellectuals are homosexuals, and Bond says no, they're not. So intellectualism is something that's quite other in Bond, regardless of what other characteristics someone has. So I'm just trying to think of a really intelligent person in Bond who or someone who works in science who isn't evil. And I'm coming up short a bit
Q,
at the
yeah.
moment.
Well,
Yeah,
Q
but
isn't
Q-
evil,
Q-
but Q is treated like shit throughout the series.
And Q
Yeah.
is other in the last three Craig movies as well. Yeah, but Q's probably the only boffin. But you're right. Bond doesn't have the greatest of respect for Q until at least License to Kill. Yeah.
All right, we've gone so long, but the end cannot be far away. So, special mention for an actor goes to, what do you think, Lisa?
Okay. I mean, I know I want to say Paloma, but you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to say Jeffrey Wright as Felix Leiter. I was sad that he was killed off. I think that he's a great actor, and I love seeing his scenes with Bond. And when they were playing the games, I actually felt a sense of lightness between the two of them, that bond of friendship, right? You're supposed to know that he is Bond's compatible or comparable person in the CIA, and that they're friends. But rarely do you see the friendship part of their connection. And I felt as though, even though the two of them have had interactions throughout, I actually felt a sense of friendship and friendliness with them when they were in Jamaica. And I think that Jeffrey Wright is just a fantastic actor in general. So I give my shout out to him.
Tom, what do you think?
Ana de Armas, for sure. 100%.
Henrik?
Ana de Armas also for me. Really enjoyed Paloma for the 5 minutes that we got her in almost 3-hour film.
David?
I'm tempted to go with Daniel Craig, because I honestly think that he's just spectacular here. But I'm going to say Ben Whishaw, because it's actually his reaction. One of my favourite scenes in the movie is when Bond and Moneypenny basically drink the red wine that he's intending for his date. But his reaction when he knows Bond is about to die at the end is what actually completely broke me and left me in a puddle for about 15 minutes.
I'm a puddle on the floor.
That's the one.
From my end, it would go to Daniel Craig. and maybe Ana de Armas for making a pretty complicated character in short time work. Zach?
I would say Lea Seydoux.
Oh, okay. Bring attention to some very small role, or whichever role in the film that you found somehow worth of highlighting for whatever reason. Could be an extra or something else. Tom?
Rory Kinnear.
Really?
Okay.
Lisa?
I'm going to say a shout out to Judi Dench's M, who is making her way into the 5th Daniel Craig film, even though she's dead, but she's in a portrait, and still is one of the most powerful matriarchs that we've ever seen in a film franchise, let alone the Bond franchise.
She's been in all of Daniel Craig films now, yeah.
Not even death can stop Judi Dench.
No. And Zach, what's your pick?
I'm going to say Billy Magnuson because he just is so like smarmy, dumb American in that way, like he can't stop smiling. He just pulls that off really well.
All right. On my part, I give it to, however you pronounce this, Colleen Defoe, playing the young Madeleine. I think all the child performances are really good in the film, not distracting in any way.
I was going to say that as well. The child, it's so, how many films can we think of that we've all seen where a child performance has basically ruined the entire movie? Right. Like Guardians of the Galaxy, that first awful 5 minutes with that really bad child actor, and so many others. But I thought both of them were pitch perfect here. Mathilde, and I'm a bit biased because I've got a niece who's about to turn 5 years old. But I found Mathilde instantly engaging. I love that little moment, which in any other Bond movie you'd think, oh, will be a plot point later on, like Chekhov's gun payoff. But she just starts talking about a mosquito bite on her arm, and that's the kind of random stuff that my 5-year-old niece comes out with, and you go, okay, right, fab, great, moving on now. But you know, that kind of sweet little detail, and they didn't need to put that in the movie, but I think they did to basically say, this is a real child here.
Is she your pick as the actress?
Yeah, I'm going to go with her because everyone else has picked all the others I'd go with.
Henrik?
I'm gonna give it to Christoph Waltz as Blofeld. Who really makes a spectacular performance as a man who can't get up from a chair and still has to kind of carry entire Spectre plotline on his shoulders at the end.
What resonated with you the most or the least in the film? Let's start with David.
I have always identified with Bond, even when I couldn't kind of see why a gay man like me would. And the line that sticks in my head, it's actually Safin's line, is the one where he says, taunts Bond, life is all about leaving something behind, isn't it? And I'm not going to get too deep and meaningful. I almost started crying about this when I did my own podcast about No Time to Die. But I think we all think about that from time to time. As an atheist, I don't believe I'm going anywhere else when I've died. I'm unlikely to pass on my genetic material when I have, but because I probably won't have children of my own. But, you know, we all think about that legacy that we pass on. And for me, I think that's the central theme of the film. And that's the part that just tears me apart, thinking about that. And there not being easy answers to that.
Lisa?
You know, as somebody who got married to We Have All the Time in the World as my wedding song, don't use that music if you plan on having a long-lasting relationship, because what that song always reminds me of is that marriage and families are not sustainable in the world of Bond. They're not sustainable in the world of spies. They will always separate your loyalty from queen and country. You will probably be more loyal to your family and make those types of personalized decisions. And I think it's just don't use it as your wedding song, as I did. I got divorced. I'm just saying, like, you know, we did not have all the time in the world. The time ran out. So.
Oh dear. Tom.
Yes.
Hello. Still here. What resonated with you the most or the least?
I don't know. Still trying to figure that one out.
Still processing. Henrik?
From my end, it's gonna be the moment when Felix the Leiter dies. Like there are two major deaths, as mentioned in the film. This one and when Bond dies at the very end, and I didn't cry on either one of them. With Bond's death, I felt kind of a dull surprise. I was like, "Are you gonna remember that Q branch has the EMP tech that can disable nanobots? Oh, you're not. Okay. Well, at least when Felix the Leiter died, there was the it was a good life line and some nice cinematography. So from these two moments, I'm gonna pick Felix the Leiter.
I was expecting James Bond actually to give some kind of a kiss to Felix Leiter at that moment. I felt that there was some kind of chemistry going on. That now you could do that.
You're not alone in that regard. There are quite a few licensed to queer readers who are like, "Where's the kiss here?" Even if it's just on the forehead.
That would have been way too modern for this movie.
But forehead,
and James Bond in general. James Bond can't be like that adventurous. At least with this one, it's finally apparent.
I like the clash of multiple styles in the film and how well it still turned out. Like the horror, the realism, the camp, the serious, the romance, the tragedy, and it just works pretty well. What about Zach?
What resonated the most with me was the emotionality of the film, and as I said, the thing that just did not resonate with me was the villain and his entire motivation.
Also, the action scenes I have to mention, and the rich colors in the film, and how the characters are written. The rich colors, though, when I started to pay more attention to it, there's not really any kind of a color coding that I could bring. I mean, there's a lot of rainbow colors and a lot of colorful clubs and all kinds of places. But for example, when you look at the ship scene when Felix Leiter and the company is there, the downstairs of that ship, that's in blue color and the upstairs is in red color. But it's not like this kind of a dynamics would work later in the movie that you would have the bad guys with the red color and the good guys with the blue color or something like that. I think it's just all over the place and trying to be a very colorful film.
I actually disagree with that. I think that there's a definite color palette that is resonating across the entire films where there is a blue lens or blue filter that is being used. There's a lot of blue lighting or blue scenes with like the red pops of color. So I think the Cuba sequence is really good at a representation. If you look at the way that the computer models are being presented, there's the blue that's present and then there's the red. If you look at the color coding of what the actual cast are wearing when the group of them get together in MI6, the men are wearing blue shades and the women are wearing like burnt orange shades. Like I do feel as though this is a film that's using the same basic color palette of dark blue, white, and sort of that burnt red color throughout lighting, filters, and costuming. That for me, that was probably one of the most like prominent things that was like connecting the entire film. At least that's my reading of it.
I don't think it's as simple as that in terms of signifiers. Bond's always in blue, especially Daniel Craig with his blue eyes. Yeah. Apart from when he's in pink, and it's a shame we haven't had a pink dressed Bond for 50 years until the movie premiere anyway. But I'm not as someone who's spent a long time studying semiotics over the years. And I've only seen the film once though. I didn't spot an overall schema to the nothing obvious anyway to the colours. Lisa, what were you about to say about blue?
Oh, I was going to say it reminds me a lot of the color palette in Skyfall, where it was supposed to be reflecting the Union Jack. And so for me, my only question is the reddish color seems to be a little bit off. And so I don't know. Again, I have to see it. I was thinking more in terms of elements, so I really wasn't thinking in terms of color when I was watching it. I just recognized the color palette, but blue has been a predominant color that has represented agents in MI6 who are loyal to Bond. And so that's something that has really fed its way through the Daniel Craig era. And then the question is, how do you understand the red and things like that? But I don't know. I think that there's a lot here to digest and interpret. I think there's a reason. I'm pretty sure there is a reason. I just haven't figured it out yet. So
I'm not going to bore you with all the references, but as I say, I read the making of book today, and the lighting references were mostly quite famous works of art. So there's the Edward Hopper painting Nighthawks, which is supposed to be the lighting reference for this very famous painting, where it's that scene where he meets Paloma for the first time, and there's some modern art that's referenced later on, but the thing that I did notice as I was watching the film and had confirmed from reading about it was that a lot of scenes, particularly in the pre-titles, were shot at magic hour. So that around an hour before the sun comes up or when the sun goes down. So they were having to get up really early in the day, or time things perfectly towards the end of the day to get that look to it, which is always said to be like the best time to get some really gorgeous shots. So I thought that was interesting from a colour and lighting point of view.
In one adjective, how would you describe this film?
My adjective is gonna be soft, aimless. It sounds harsher than it's meant to be. I didn't feel that the movie overall was like catastrophically aimless in what it wanted to do, but the plot still it kind of keeps bouncing around without a clear goal that it would want to achieve.
I will go with chromatic, I guess, with the color theme following on that.
I was going to go with overwhelming because that's how I felt about it 24 hours after, and still a week later it's kind of like, whoa, I'm still processing it. But I think I'll go with epochal. For me, this very much has a feel of being an end point, but also a new beginning. I also think where possibilities are going to open up, but I also think that it's I always get a lot of the time I get quite disappointed by film endings, to be honest. I think it's so hard to wrap things up, and I think this ending does define this era of Bond quite neatly.
Lisa?
An adjective. That's not an adjective, because the only word that comes to mind is end. Like, I feel like this is the end of the Daniel Craig era.
Final.
As someone who's felt it's been one note, I'm like, okay, well, if we're gonna end it, let's just end it and move on and reboot.
Yeah. Zach?
I'm going with David and Lisa. My adjective was completed.
Would you consider to watch No Time to Die?
Never
again?
Say Never Again. I haven't seen Never Say Never Again for about 20 years. I'm stealing myself for it.
No, I can't blame you. Henrik, would you watch it again? No Time to Die, in this case.
At some date, yeah. I don't hate Quantum of Solace as much as the entire rest of the world. To me, No Time to Die is kind of quantum tier.
Tom?
I agree with Henrik. It's going to be a long time before I see it again.
Lisa?
Well, I have to keep watching it to study it, so sure.
Yeah, David guess agrees with that.
Yeah.
Zach?
I'm desperate to see it again. I almost went to see it again today, but I just couldn't find the time. Yeah, I will perhaps next weekend see it again.
Zach?
Yes, for sure.
Yeah, also from my end. Nothing much to add to that. Do you think this film will have a legacy? Staying power? I think yes, because it's the film where Bond dies, so in some sense, yes.
In terms of the villains, it's a huge no.
Yeah. Lisa?
Sure. I mean, it's the film that kills James Bond, so that's going to be its legacy regardless of anything else.
Henrik?
Yeah, I agree with you guys. It's gonna have a legacy, but it's because Bond dies and because the pre-release hype and because this is post-Me Too Bond and Corona Bond and all this stuff.
David?
Yeah, the death thing is the big part of it here. I think all bets are off for future Bonds, and I think ultimately that will be liberating because we were talking about this, I think, before we started recording, but For whatever reason, the box office receipts are not as positive in the USA as they are here in the UK, where Bond is, a baked-in cultural institution. But even here, audiences are getting older. Bond doesn't connect with many younger people, particularly the younger people I'm very familiar with in my day job. So I think that whatever they do next, I think that what they've done here will set them up for doing something quite different. I have no idea what that is, and I honestly don't think they have any idea what that is either. But when they've decided what it is, I think it will go in quite a different direction. And, I'm up for that. I know some people will be kicking their heels, screaming at the idea, but we'll see.
Zach, anything to add?
No, I think you guys have said it all.
Well, in that case, would you recommend No Time to Die? On my end, it would be yes. This is a film that it's more than I could have hoped for. There's something kind of natural about the flow of the film still, and the dialogue and the word choices. They sound pretty natural and to the point, but it's not some kind of a super edgy dialogue that you have Casino Royale, almost to a fault. I like the Bond's arm twisting with Mallory, Leiter's death, where Bond is being adamant that Mallory is a mess as well, and that it's Mallory's mess and not James Bond's mess. And the death scene may not be perfectly executed, but it still works for me. The movie's just a hell of a lot to process. It feels like a film written by a fan for the fans, but with a pretty good taste. It works more for the film's benefit than against it. Zach?
Yes. I think it might be better if you could see some of the other Daniel Craig films to know who these people are, but I don't think it's an absolute.
David?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go with my father-in-law here, who's in his mid-70s now, and he's not a Bond obsessive like us, many of us, where we can quote every line and sound effect and that kind of stuff. But he watches his Bond regularly. And I see him as the barometer of the Bonds, so he doesn't like Quantum of Solace because it's all choppy and everything. And I didn't used to like Quantum of Solace, but now I love it. And that sort of, he loves Skyfall. It's the kind of crowd pleasing one, I always think. He absolutely loved this, and again, it was perhaps the circumstances we were watching it in, but I kind of see him as the person who likes Bond but doesn't obsess over it and overthink it like I do. And he really loved it. I really loved it. So I would recommend this to people, yeah.
Tom, would you recommend?
It was a good watch. I think it departed way too much from the original Bond, so it's okay. I guess I would. It's not my cup of tea.
Lisa?
I was asked by somebody when I was pumping gas this morning, and he said, should I go see it? I said, sure, go see it twice. So that's my advice to people. See it once, get shocked, see it the second time so you can actually dig into it, and then figure out if you like it after that.
There's maybe like two questions that I would still like to ask super quick. Like the order of the films that you would put the Daniel Craig films, in which order would you put? I will go first. Casino Royale, No Time to Die, Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, and Spectre. Yes. Lisa?
Casino Royale, Skyfall, Quantum of Solace, No Time to Die, and Spectre. Although Quantum of Solace in this film, let's put them at a tie.
Tom?
Skyfall, Casino Royale, No Time to Die, and the rest, the toss-up.
Henrik?
Skyfall, Casino, No Time to Die, Quantum, Spectre.
David?
Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace, No Time to Die, Skyfall, and Spectre.
Zach?
I've only ever seen 3 of them, so I'm going to say it's Skyfall, No Time to Die, Spectre.
Complete the sentence, please. You really know you're watching No Time to Die. When?
When you have so ristuksen kirjannut, että ees kuolla ehdi. Those who know it, know it.
Yeah, basically finish for when you're so goddamn busy that you have no time to die. When your poor fanboy brain goes on overdrive, short circuits, catches fire and explodes. David?
When you're simultaneously sweating and crying uncontrollably. In other words, just when you're leaking out of every pore of your body. Which is a very unpleasant image, I'll give you. But, that was pretty much me last weekend.
Tom?
It's when you cry for the first time in literally years.
Lisa?
when Bond dies.
Zach?
When you're looking into those baby blue eyes, looking into the baby blue eyes of his child.
Dear listener, would you recommend No Time to Die? Come and comment on our social media pages. I don't know how to say goodbye, but I guess actions speak louder than words. So,
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
yeah.
Yeah, it was nice to have you all as our guests.
And Patreon announcement. This is a very special night for us. We've just now launched Patreon, where you can support this podcast. We want you to know that only through your very generous donations can the work here at the Flick Lab continue to progress. You know, we've learned so much, but we've only just scratched the surface. We need your help. We need you to go to your internet browsers right now and make a pledge. This is not for me, this is not for them, it's for all of us. We need your help. Bless your hearts.
I don't think I've learned anything from this podcast.
That's a universally felt experience.
This has been the most ham-fisted quote-filled episode that I've ever done in this podcast. Sorry for everybody. But do you want to drop any links? Where can people find Dr. Lisa Funnell?
You can find me, Dr. Lisa Funnell, 2 N's, 2 L's, and Funnell on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can go to lisafunnell.com for my website, and you can find my books and other writings on Amazon.
What about Mr. License to Queer, where we can find you?
Yeah. So if you just put license to queer, or if you just type James Bond queer into Twitter, it'll come up immediately. Into Google, I mean, sorry. Yeah, license is spelt the British way, like the title of the film was, so 2 C's. But if you type in the American one, it'll redirect you anyway. And it's the same on Twitter and Instagram. Please get in touch if you want to write something or do anything. It's a really collaborative thing, so the more the merrier.
Yep. And I've been Karri, and you can find me also on Twitter if you can type my name correctly. Good luck with that. And Zach, I think we can find you as well.
Yes, Zachary Pen 48 on Twitter.
And Henrik?
Well, there really is no social media to follow me.
So, onto the dark alley to find you then.
Yeah, into the dark alley.
Hopefully I didn't sound offensive or...
I don't think
Never
so.
know.
Only the puns. I was offended by the puns.
I was offended by the quality of puns.
That's what we do best here. Much more, Roger more. Cucumber sandwich, afternoon tea.
That's the level of intellect.
All right, thanks so much. That was the Bond run. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in a fortnight.
Bye-bye.
Until then.
Later.
I'm like, okay, well, if we're gonna end it, let's just end it and move on and reboot.